Well, how you doing today? It's Johnny Palmer, pastor of Calvary Baptist Church, Hiwassee, Arkansas. I'm going to continue on our study, book of Ecclesiastes, Lord willing, an article 2011 in National Geographic. And anyway, it asks this. It said, moody, impulsive, maddening. Why do teenagers act the way they do? And the article implies that gaining insight into the huge changes in a teenager's brain could help the parents understand their children's moods and behaviors and so forth. And it also shows why parents need to provide firm but loving guidance during the critical development of their brains. And anyway, the article goes, it says the first series of scans of the developing brain show that our brains undergo a massive reorganization between the 12th and 25th year. The brain, it says, doesn't actually grow much during this period, but as we move through adolescence, the brain undergoes extensive remodeling, resembling a network of wiring upgrade. And anyway, this upgrade to the brain is finally complete, and the entire brain, when everything finally gets into place, they said it will work a whole lot faster. Um, it also enables young adults to balance impulse and risk and desire and personal goals. But the article warns, it says, but at times, especially at first, the brain does not work, or the brain does this work clumsily. It's hard to get all those new clogs to mesh. Said these studies also explain why teens behave with such vexing inconsistency, beguiling at breakfast, disgusting at dinner, masterful on Monday, and sleepwalking on Saturday. Says along with lacking experience, generally they're still learning to use their brains as a network. Stress, fatigue, or challenges causes a misfire. Well, the article reveals, that our desires to know the whys of life, and I can assure you, everything in that article will be brought into question. Just wait a few years from now. The truth is, we usually don't know the whys of life. I mean, you got a teenager at home, and you're trying to figure out why they do everything they do. It ain't really going to happen. And this is, we'll call this the vanity, comes from not knowing the whys of life. Okay, so first, why is life like this? Ecclesiastes chapter 8, verses 1 through 17. The effect that wisdom has on a person. So we start out verse 1. You got a question here. Who is like the wise man who knows the interpretation of a matter? Well, who can really interpret, in other words, what life is about? And the answer is nobody. Only God can interpret life. Genesis 48, it says, then they said to him, we have had a dream and there's no one to interpret it. And Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell it to me, please. Daniel 2:27-28. Daniel answered before the king and said, as for the mystery about which the king has inquired, neither wise men, conjurers, magicians, nor diviners are able to declare it to the king. However, there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. So, the question to what life is all about and so forth, we take comfort from knowing, even though we don't understand half what's going on, God understands it all. And then there's the observation. It says a man's wisdom illuminates him and causes his stern face to beam. So in other words, wisdom is reflected in one's face. I remember an advisor to Abraham Lincoln recommended that a particular person be for a certain cabinet position, but Lincoln balked and said, "Well, I don't like the man's face." And the advisor said, "But sir, he can't be held responsible for his face, can he?" And Lincoln replied, "Every man over 40 is responsible for his face." Human wisdom may cause one to have a friendly face, but he still does not know how to interpret the meaning of life apart from God. Okay? And then we have, notice, we see the king's punishment in chapter 8, verses 2 through 9. First, we're introduced to one who renders obedience to the king. It says, "I say, keep the command of the king." Well, Solomon's power was absolute. He could basically do anything he wanted to. I mean, he didn't have any Congress or Supreme Court or anything like that to stay his hand. So it was kind of stupid not to follow his leadership. And then we have the oath that should be remembered. Goes on to say, he says, because of the oath before God. People work in the king's palace. They will do, obviously, what the king says, partly because they have sworn before God to be obedient. Okay? And then notice there should be an obliging attitude. Verse 3. It says, "Do not be in a hurry to leave him. Do not join in an evil matter, for he will do whatever he pleases. Since the word of the king is authoritative, who will say to him, 'What are you doing?'" So to disrespect or take part in a conspiracy against the king was obviously very dangerous. And then you have the outcome of such a fine citizen. And here's where the mystery comes in. You would think that things would go well for somebody who respects and obeys the king and so forth. But notice at first there's protection from harm. It says, "He who keeps the royal command experiences no trouble because he knows and follows proper procedures. Everything goes well." It notes, "For a wise heart knows the proper time and procedure for every delight." Okay? So he knows when and he knows how to speak. But here's the problem. He quickly adds a note of perplexity. It says, "Though a man's trouble is heavy upon him." In other words, in spite of being careful not to offend the king, he ends up in trouble. Why is this? Well, who knows? But the truth of it is, it happens. Even a wise man does not know the future. It says, if no one knows what will happen, who can tell him when it will happen? Ecclesiastes 8:7, "Since no man knows the future, who can tell him what is to come?" So even a wise man doesn't know the future. And then notice, even a wise man will have a fatality. It says, "No man has authority to restrain the wind with the wind, or authority over the day of his death. And there's no discharge in the time of war, and evil will not deliver those from death who practice it." Again, he's already made this clear in this book. Death comes to everybody. And the truth of it is, nobody knows when. You just don't know. And we can't be released from death any more than a soldier who is in the midst of a battle can get permission to go home. And I notice when all is said and done, power always ends up abusing somebody. All this I have seen and applied my mind to every deed that has been done under the sun, wherein a man has exercised authority over another man to his hurt. Message Bible translates it. He says, and this is Ecclesiastes 8:9, says, "All this I observed as I tried my best to understand all that's going on in this world. As long as men and women have power to hurt each other, that's the way it is." Why? Why does a wise person end up being punished by the government? Well, again, Who knows? I think of David, who could have taken King Saul's life several times, but he refused. The result of David's loyalty and respect towards Saul was that Saul spent years trying to kill David. I mean, figure it out. Who knows? And then the evil man is praised. Top of it all, it says the people who praise the wicked are identified. So then, I have seen the wicked buried, those who used to go in and out from the holy place, and they are soon forgotten or praised in the city where they did thus. This too is vanity, by the very people who have experienced the evil. Okay? The NIV follows certain manuscripts as well as the Septuagint, by the way. The Hebrew text seems to have a verb which means to forget. Probably a better translation would be, then I saw the wicked people were given a public burial. They were taken from the holy place and buried, and they were praised by the people in the city, the very place where they committed their evil acts. How could this happen? Well, actually, this is common. I've been to funerals where what was said about the person caused me to wonder if they buried the wrong person. Okay? Why is it that even the most wicked sinner tends to be spoken well of when he dies? Well, I don't know. And then notice, to make things worse, the punishment of the wicked is postponed. It says, because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed quickly, therefore the heart of the sons of men among them are given fully to do evil. I mean, you take these riots and everything that are going on. I mean, they've even gotten rid of things to where when they're arrested, they're released immediately. They're out to riot and burn things and murder people the next day virtually. And obviously, when there's no when evil deeds go unpunished and there's no teeth to the law, and you can just, it's anarchy. You can do whatever you want to, and there's no consequences. Well, it's just going to produce more evil, obviously. And so it makes things worse. It's just that simple. And oddly enough, the wicked person's life may be prolonged. It says, although a sinner does evil 100 times and may lengthen his life, still I know that it will be well with those who fear God, who fear him openly. But it will not be well with the evil man, and he will not lengthen his days like a shadow, because he does not fear God. So even though it seems like the wicked are getting away with murder, the fact of it is their day's coming, and their death day's coming, and there is a God, and there is the judgment, and there's accountability. And so obviously it's better to fear God, but we can't help wonder why the sinner does evil 100 times and lives so long. But again, everybody's going to die, and even the longest life will seem like a shadow passing. In other words, time goes by quickly, believe me. It doesn't take long, and there's no hard and fast rule. The wicked may live long, or they may die young, but the problem is many of them seem like they live a long time. Everything goes well with them, but that they're forgetting the equation that there is death. And the Bible says it's appointed unto man once to die, and after this the judgment. Hebrews 9. Well, the Message Bible puts it like this: even though a person sins and gets by with it 100 times throughout a long life, I'm still convinced that the good life is reserved for the person who fears God, who lives reverently in his presence, and that evil person will not experience a good life. No matter how many days he lives, they'll all be as flat and colorless as a shadow, because he doesn't fear God. Okay? Well, if at times Solomon says things that are confusing, and sometimes he seems to even contradict himself, that's to be expected because